spouse that's not involved in the business at all, who kind of typically maybe has just, I don't think about the business, I'm not involved in that, should be more involved in the business, to at least to some degree. And I think you've alluded to it with the communication and things, but what are some of the practical reasons why you would say that a spouse that goes, that's his or that's hers, we need to, we don't talk about that at home, that's the business. Why do people need to overcome that and actually think and talk about the business?
Well, like I said earlier, is that the business is typically the number one asset in their life. And so you should care, right? Yeah. They may not care now, but when the business starts to suffer and hits the bank account, they're going to care.
Yeah.
Right. So let's care before all things go bad. Yeah. So at the very least, even if they're not working in the business, they should at least be chief counsel to their spouse that's working the business. Sometimes it's the husband, sometimes the wife that's working the business, but they should at least be chief counsel. They should be a sounding board. A lot of times these business owners, they feel isolated. Entrepreneurs in general, as you probably know, sometimes it can feel isolating. Yeah. And so who better to confide in than your spouse? Who else is going to care or should care, right? Yeah. And so just being that sounding board, that shoulder to cry on, and then talk them off the ledge sometimes of making a bad decision because they're fearful. And sometimes just that word of encouragement from the spouse can mean all the difference in their mindset and their mentality and what they think they can do before they think things are going to cave in on them. But when you have a spouse that's encouraging you and points out the strengths in you as a leader, because sometimes we forget that as a business owner. Sometimes, I mean, one of my clients, we're having lunch and he goes, all of a sudden he just, out of the blue, he just says, I'm a bad leader. And I looked at him like, why do you say that? What does good leadership look like to you? And why do you think you're bad? And so he named a few things. And I'm like, dude, you started this business from scratch. And now it's a multi-million-dollar business. You've got a staff. You've got manufacturing in China. I go, you can't be doing everything bad. It's like, I'm sorry, dude. You can't be doing everything bad because, half of the business fell in 5 years in the United States, right? And so I said, dude, you're on the plus side of success for most businesses. And so you got to be doing something right. And so that's kind of an example of how, obviously it wasn't his spouse, but, how what would happen, the meaning when it comes from your spouse also sometimes means even that much more than when it comes from a consultant. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's someone you're doing life with, it's someone you're putting your trust into. And so, when we've had clients, that's all he wanted from his wife. His wife had a career as a nurse educator and he wanted her to be involved, but there's miscommunication of what kind of involvement he wanted her to be. She thought she wanted him to work in the business, and that's not what he wanted. He just wanted encouragement. He couldn't pinpoint exactly what he needed. Yeah. But through our conversations, I said, what you really need is encouragement. He says, yeah. Yeah. And that's what his wife does every day at work, is encourage these patients in the hospital, right? So I'm like, that's an example of how we can use her gifting to support the husband, even while you're not even working in the business, but just use your gift of encouragement in this case to encourage your spouse, because that meant all the world to him. Because as soon as we said that, made that connection, he just lit up.
Just being able to communicate that, because she was making his lunch, doing all this other stuff. And she's like, I don't have time to be involved in this business. I got my own stuff going on. I'm making his lunch. I'm doing this and that. How much more could he need? But he wasn't able to communicate what he needed. And when he was, and she's like, oh, I can do that.
That's easier than making lunch. So she was doing her best to support the husband, but neither of them can communicate what really we needed. Yeah. And so once that connection was made, then, oh, I get it. So that's an example of how, even if you're not working the business, how you can support. But it's also an example, once we identified the gift, that there's other cases that, oh, now we know how the wife or the husband can actually work in the business. What's the best role in the business to support by understanding what they're good at, right? Because a lot of times the spouse will bring their husband or wife into the business primarily to fill an empty seat to save on payroll. It's not necessarily based on, does it match?
We might have had a conversation like that just this week.
Oh, yeah.
At your house?
Yes, yeah. I said, we got some change coming. Maybe you could fill it for a little bit.
So what that does is create more dysfunction, because now they start to really don't want to be part of the business more than they already are, because they're already unhappy with what they're doing.
Yeah.
But once we rearrange and find what they're good at and where in the business that matches, that's a whole different ballgame. Then the whole ballgame changes. And then when they are working in the business, that creates so much increase in productivity because it's matching their gift and skills.
That's good. And you guys, as third party, outsiders complementing this, coming alongside these couples, are able to facilitate and foster a conversation that, like in that example, the husband didn't have the words or maybe even the thought to go, I'm looking for encouragement, but you've seen that coming alongside them and identifying that and speaking that out. Maybe something, even if you would have identified it, wouldn't have felt comfortable asking for it. But the fact that you as a third party are able to do that is a real blessing to not only the business, right, but their marriage. And like you said, back to communication.